All right. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us tonight. Sorry for the slight delay there. My name is Travis Fortney. I'm an adult services librarian at the Willoughby Public Library, and we're coming to you live from Lake County, Ohio, and Portland, Maine, I think. Tonight, we're going to talk to Susan Conley about her new novel, Landslide. A reminder to everyone, you can keep up with Between the Lines events by checking the library's Facebook page or the library events calendar at we247.org. Tonight, I'm extremely excited to welcome Susan Conley to Between the Lines. Lily King called Landslide a spectacular tale of hardship and healing. Susan's also the author of the novels Elsie Come Home and Paris Was a Place, and the memoir The Foremost Good Fortune. Other works of hers have appeared in the New York Times Magazine, the Paris Review, the Huffington Post, Plowshares, the Harvard Review, and elsewhere. Susan has received fellowships from the MacDowell Colony, the Breadloaf Writers Conference, and the Massachusetts Art Council. She currently teaches at the University of Maine Stonecoast MFA program and is the co-founder of The Telling Room, a nonprofit creative writing lab in Portland, Maine. I finished reading Landslide about a week ago, and it's going to end up as one of my favorite books of the year. Landslide is set in coastal Maine fishing village and explores what happens to a mother and her teenage sons when a fishing accident leaves their husband and father hospitalized in Canada. The book handles themes that include motherhood, art, financial hardship, the brutality of nature, and fishing. I've got some questions written down for Susan, but my hope is that some of you will jump in with questions of your own as the conversation goes on. To ask Susan a question, just type it into chat on Zoom or as a comment on Facebook, and we'll find it and ask Susan your question. To start, I believe Susan has agreed to read a short section of the book. Susan, thanks so much for visiting with us tonight.
Oh, I'm so glad to be here. Thank you, everyone, for coming. The book Landslide has only been out for 2 weeks today. So this is my first event past like the I guess the Mississippi River, or it's we're moving west, but so far we've been doing only New England events. And we had a huge ice storm here in Maine last night and today. So everything's coated with this sheet of ice. And I would have never gotten out of my driveway had we been even trying to get me to Ohio. So it's great to be here. I love that introduction. Thank you, Travis. You really hit on a lot of the themes of the book. And I'm happy to read a bit. I'll just read a few pages, just as you said, to kind of drop us into the book. You can get the feeling for it. So we are, this is, I don't know if you can see, this is the cover, and it's a picture of a boy kind of in free fall, and it's 2020, and we're on the coast of Maine. And it's not giving anything away to say that the husband, who's a commercial fisherman, has gotten in a big accident on his boat. And the mother, Jill, a woman in her late 40s, is driving the 2 teenage boys back to a dock where they're going to get on a little tiny skiff and go across a little channel to a little island where they live, where the husband's family, has been fishing for many generations. Okay. It's late afternoon at the end of a long October when the Fleetwood Mac song comes on. We're halfway down the peninsula, and I tell the wolves I was raised on Stevie Nicks. So could they please let me listen to the whole thing? Because Sam, the younger one, has a bad habit of changing the station. Mom, he says in his deadpan and stares out the cracked windshield. I already knew that about you growing up on Stevie Nicks. He's 16 and gangly with poking collarbones like little car door handles. He wants to be a professional basketball player, but will settle for a rock musician. His face has grown long and gaunt, so he doesn't look like himself, but the person he's in the process of becoming. I tell myself it's a beautiful face. It's important to tell myself that many things about teenage boys are beautiful, so I don't panic. The song is about a woman who climbs a mountain at the end of a love affair and sees her reflection in the snow-covered hills and becomes less afraid. It's in a challenging register for me, so I'm almost crowing while I sing. But for many months, I've wanted to be less afraid. And I feel for a moment like Stevie Nicks is a close friend, like she knows me. Every time I turn on the radio, Sam says in his most sarcastic voice, it's Stevie the Good Witch of the West Nicks. The thing is, Mom, I don't want to grow up in Maine on Fleetwood Mac like you did. His hair is the color of straw and hangs below his ears, and I can't tell if the hair is a joke or a bad fashion statement that involves rarely washing it. But I grin at him and move my head to the beat because at least he's speaking. Sometimes my son's silence in the car is flammable. Charlie's in the back seat. He's our moral police, 17 going on something like 33. He thinks sports are a hoax and believes in the laws of physics and a senior named Lucy, who recently moved to Maine from Burundi. He's taller and sturdier than Sam and has my husband's dark, wavy hair that doesn't move even in high winds. I am trying not to think about my husband. He is renowned on the peninsula for his gargantuan energy and for being a fisherman who doesn't come home empty-handed. 10 days ago, his boat engine exploded off Georges Bank and he broke his right femur and got airlifted to a hospital in Nova Scotia where he's recovering from surgery. I'm not allowed to talk to the boys about how much I miss him. I'm not allowed to talk to the boys about my dread or my worry or any of my emotions, really. This isn't because the boys aren't emotional. It's just that no outward expression of emotion is sanctioned in this phase of wolf development. I've still somehow convinced myself that I'm needed more here with them than with my husband, even though the boys answer most of my questions in monosyllables. Since I got back from the hospital 2 days ago, I have not been able to take my eyes off of them. The tourists have all left, so there are no other cars on the road, just a fading sun that knives through the pine trees and puts its little spell on me. I keep asking myself who I want to be for Kit and Sam and Charlie. It's a coping strategy I read about in the hospital last week. Who do you want to be for the people who need you? Kit told me last week he didn't know who he was anymore now that he couldn't fish. The newspapers write about all the real estate money pouring into our state and how good the restaurants are. But most fishermen I know are selling their trawlers and fending off lenders. And I began making a film about this a year ago, about how almost none of the fishermen here can afford to fish anymore. You think you know me, I say to the boys, but you might not know all of me. Oh, we know you, Mom. Sam turns and rolls his eyes at his older brother like I'm a nut job. And I will stop there.
Thanks. That's kind of right at the opening of the book, and that's a good section to read. I want to ask, I didn't have this question written down, but the significance of the title Landslide, is it all the Stevie Nicks song? Is there more to it than that? I don't know. It's just, well, I guess I can practically answer it myself,
yeah,
but
I bet you can. Yeah. Yes. Short answer is yes. There's more to it. So for me, and I think we all find this in a lot of books, you'll see a writer land on a great like idea / metaphor, and then we'll just pull it through the book. So I wanted to write about the collapse of commercial fishing in Maine, and I wanted to write about how hard those teenage years can be for kids, particularly these two boys. And I also wanted to write about, this idea of a marriage and love. And so I landed on the Stevie Nicks song, and then I just had fun with it. I just really played on that metaphor a lot. Yeah.
So I want to dive into the idea of I guess, the fishing industry, I wanted to ask you, what made you want to write a novel about a fisherman or the fishing industry in Maine?
Yeah. So I grew up here and I'm fourth generation Maine. And in Maine, our first industry was fishing, and it's sort of one of our iconic brands. And I grew up on the coast. And as I looked around me over the last 20 years or so, I noticed that the fishing trawlers were just dropping off one by one. So where we used to have 12, then we had 10, and then 4. And then in the coastal area where I live, now we have none. And I was really thinking for a long time about how to write about that. And part of me, I have written a memoir before. I've written nonfiction a fair bit. And I thought, well, I could write a nonfiction book about it, but I realized it wasn't going to have the same emotional resonance for me because it really wasn't a very happy ending. And I just thought I could convey it better through fiction. And then I started interviewing fishermen. I grew up around a lot of fishermen, but I went around the state and I interviewed fishermen. And I learned a lot about the state of fishing here, and it's not all bad. There really is a lot of movement towards recovery, but the number of boats has just dropped off so dramatically here.
What do you suppose? I mean, what is it? What's affecting? I just don't know what's affecting the fishing industry in Maine.
Well, it starts with the whole part about how the fishermen, and this is like a known sort of fact here in Maine, is that we used to have a lot of fish and they all got caught. So we caught a lot of fish, and we didn't sustain the stock, that we were catching the mothers and the babies. And then we put a lot of sort of checks and balances in place, and we started to recover species. But by the time we recovered a lot of species, and not all of them have recovered, what I learned was that the boats had gone elsewhere. So then we lost our infrastructure to support the boats. So it's amazing how it's like that domino effect. And we know it in many industries, right? But you lose the one thing, and then you lose the ice house, and then you lose the propane gas shop, and then you lose the boat builder, and suddenly you've lost all the infrastructure. And then, how can we get boats and fishermen back? And then the other part is just huge financial hurdles to invest. If you're young,
to become a fisherman kind of thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
To buy in is really hard, really hard. And what I learned is that it used to be that a family would pass down their boat. It was part of your family legacy, but a lot of fishermen in Maine had to sell off their boat just to survive.
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of what happens to Kit in the novel, kind of. I assume he says at one point his mother wanted him to have that boat, or it was her vision for his life or something.
Yeah.
And so who knows how many generations had that boat been in his family? Probably at least 3 or something.
Yep. Yeah, I bet.
So let's see. So I think, I wanted to ask you about how wrapped up in fishing Maine's identity is, but I think you've answered it. So I want to transition to how Jill is concerned with Maine's identity, or what Maine looks like from Jill's perspective. Jill's a documentarian. She makes small documentaries that bore into the identity of places in Maine. And now she's trying to finish a film about Seawall, which is Seawall how you would say the name of the town?
That's cool.
I like Seawall.
Yeah, that's cool.
So Sewell, we'll just call it Seawall. Is that okay?
I think it's much better, Seawall. I like it too. We may say Sewell, but I'm going with Seawall. I like that.
Sweet. So she's trying to finish a film about Seawall where the book is set, and that's kind of meta in a way, because we're watching Jill struggle to craft this film and decide what to include, but we're reading a book that's also about the town and is what you've decided to include. So how is Seawall different in Jill's eyes from that kind of like, I don't know, from the fishing identity of Maine? And what did you as a writer, like who's writing what, about Jill's viewpoint of the town, what did you want to show readers about the town? Is that
So
too?
in Maine, no, that's great. It's great. I mean, I bet you have this. I know we have this in everywhere in this United States. And I'm sure of it in Ohio, but we have these small towns, and then the families will stay in these towns, for generation and generation. And in Maine, the fishing villages. When I was growing up, you knew which family was kind of the anchor for which village. And then so you'd take like the name, like, I don't know, let's take the name Totman. And then there would be like 25 Totman cousins in that village, and then 4 Totman brothers. And like, that was their village. And then you go to the next village and so on. So Jill comes from a mill town, because mills are another huge industry in Maine, or they were.
Yeah.
And what I was doing with Jill was I was creating the sense of being an outsider and an insider.
Yeah.
So he's the consummate insider. It's his village. She's only 2 hours north, but she already she doesn't fish. She's not a fisher person. And so I was really looking at that idea of who belongs in these small towns. And, she certainly has people that she trusts in the town. She's very close with Kit's sister, but she also is trying to figure out how she fits in. And she makes these little films, like you said, and the film she's making, I think, about his town is helping her in a way to fit in. It's also what got her out of Maine, because she actually left Maine for a few years and was doing more films outside the country. And she was the first person in her family to leave the country. So I was really looking at these issues of class too, and how these cycles of class can be broken. Like she breaks with the working class. She kind of moves up when she gets out of the country, but then she comes back for love, really.
How much of that parallels your own life? Because I know I was reading about you, and I know that you also grew up in Maine and also, went to Europe, and I think, and you have a book about Paris, right? I haven't read your earlier books, but it seems like this book is kind of a return to Maine for you artistically too. Is that fair to say? And you don't have to talk about how much it parallels your own life if you don't want to.
No, it's not an autobiographical book in the sense of paralleling my life, but and this is this wonderful thing where like fact and fiction diverge in novels. So I have an emotional kind of knowingness about leaving Maine and coming back. And I also know that across class, didn't matter, if you were working class or middle class. When I grew up in a really very poor town in Maine, you still might want to leave the state because it's a very, very isolated place. So a lot of people talked about leaving, and Jill left, and I left too. And I think part of my curiosity about that, actually, Travis, was my dad. As I said, he's 4th generation, and he left and went to Vermont for college, and that was a really big deal. He was the first person in his family to go to college. Mm-hmm. But my mother was not from Maine, so I think I was interested in that story, and I'm watching her navigate Maine. All of these years. Yeah.
Interesting. Let's see. So I want to run with this. Like, I want to ask a little more about Jill here. Okay. So great. To me, I wondered, about Jill kind of sticking with her art, I guess, through thick and thin in the book, when, how that idea of continuing with the filmmaking, even though things are not going well for her by any stretch of the imagination financially. I mean, her husband is in the hospital, maybe on the verge of losing his career, already in a dying industry, potentially losing the boat. Yet, like when she has a quiet moment in the book, which there aren't that many, maybe, but her thoughts, instead of turning to despair or how can I make $1, or they often turn to her art or the film she's working on. So I wanted to ask you about that idea of sticking with your art through through hardship.
I like
that. Makes
that.
sense.
Yeah, that's such a great question. It makes me go. I'm going to places in the book.
Oh.
So I just went to the book and saw this key moment. I think that I think she has to make these films because they got her out of her mill town, which was a dying town. The mill was dead. They got her to Portland, which is our biggest city in Maine. And then through a weird thing a place where she was working, she ends up getting this opportunity to go be an assistant on some larger, actually like little videography things out of the country. So here's a key. I'll read this little moment, Travis. So she makes these different films. So she says the films become a conversation that often ends up talking about the purpose work gives people in Maine. So, she's very committed to this, this work. I made a film about the mill town I grew up in, and one about the shoe factories in Lewiston and the shipyard in Bath. I think they explore the idea of change and whether change has to mean suffering. And when I landed on that line, I felt like, oh, that's a big, important line for my novel, because so much is changing in Maine right now. Yeah. And so many people have lost their jobs, and Kit, by losing commercial fishing, he's losing his whole identity. And I'm really wondering, and the book really wonders, like, will he make it, and will he suffer terribly? And then she talks about leaving the island, and how she needed to leave because she had a feeling at times that her mother was trapped in her town, and that Jill needed to leave Maine because she didn't want to feel trapped. And then I'll just read this little bit. She shows her first film, and I don't know if you remember this part, Travis, but she shows it, and she gets a sort of she encounters this man, and this was sort of a key scene for me. I don't know if you remember this scene.
I do, but
yeah. Okay, she says, we did the first screening of the film in Portland, and a man found me in the lobby of the theater afterward and told me he'd recently moved to Portland because of all the good food. Then he asked where I came from. He wore a black leather jacket and had spiky gray hair that made him look like the older version of Sting. I told him I came from Harwich, the mill town. You're from Harwich, he said. He shook his head. It's amazing to me that you come from a town like Harwich and have made such a good film. And I said, neither Harwich nor I have been insulted that well in a long time. And it was fun to read. I haven't ever read that part before yet, but I really wanted to get at how, like, she came from such a poor town, and there was this assumption that she wouldn't be able to make art, you know, because she was from this poor town.
So to me, Jill kind of sticking with her art through this, through the situation, but also obviously through her, coming from this tiny town, it was a way of showing her toughness. All these stoic fishermen living on the rocky shore of Maine, in an island in the freezing winter across a channel that's uncrossable in a storm. I think all of it's rubbed off on her a bit. I think the reason she sticks with her art through it all is that she can basically weather anything. Do you think so?
Oh, I like that. Yeah. And she's weathering two teenage boys who are giving her a run for the money. I like that. Yeah. I like that. I think she is tough. I do.
So you call the boys the wolves in the book. Why is wolves the right metaphor for teenage boys?
Well, it felt right from the very beginning. These two boys, these brothers, are really devoted to each other, and they also like fight a lot and they actually physically wrestle, and you just get that image of those wolf cubs in a pack, like fighting and then breaking and then fighting. And wolves are really smart. They're wily. They're beautiful. They're really physical. I don't know. I had a lot of fun with that metaphor. I landed on it early. I also think this book kind of plays with the idea of stereotypes around boys and kind of unpacks stereotypes, subverts stereotypes. And I think wolves kind of do that too. Like we may have one idea of a wolf, and then we learn how incredibly smart they are. So wolves are surprising too.
Yeah. So if the boys are wolves, what does that make Jill? I guess a wolf, right? There you go.
Very good question.
How would the book be different if Jill was the mother of girls instead of boys?
I think it would be an entirely different novel. Yeah. I think you could get, and here's where work and life do overlap. I only have boys. So I always say I speak boy, not girl. But I am a woman. Obviously, I understand the language of girls probably more than I had to learn boy. And I wanted to show the way that mothers have to sometimes, not always, I'll just say for this novel, Jill had to work harder to understand Charlie and Sam and really connect with them. And so that's really part of the fun of this book is like the humor. The boys come at her with humor a lot.
Yeah.
And she has to like field it and understand it. And yeah, I don't know. The girls could have done that too, but she wouldn't have had this. She had to cross a bigger like divide to connect with them, with the boys.
Yeah, I think that maybe is the main source of humor in the book. I hadn't really thought about that, but her interacting with the boys is, it's a very not tragic novel, but very serious. But there's a lot of humor in the interaction with the boys. Let's see. So something I wanted to ask is, as I was reading, so I come from a family of 4 boys. My mother obviously raised 4 boys. But I don't think I've read, I can't think of many more novels that I've read specifically about mothering teenage boys. It seems like usually the boys are, I don't know, parentless and in the wild and doing crazy things or something, or horrible things or whatever. But so I was wondering if, as you were writing this book and thinking about, the topic, if you came across more novels about, mothering teenage boys, I guess, for lack of a better way of phrasing it, that you could share with people.
Yeah, that's such a good point. Maybe people will even put their ideas in the chat too of boy novels. I don't think there are many.
Yeah.
And you've hit right on it, Travis. I actually think part of why I wrote this novel is because I couldn't find enough novels that featured teenage boys. We have The Catcher in the Rye by Salinger, right? We have to go way back for that. I recently wrote an essay about books about books about boys with moms and boys. And I had to reach hard. Like there was that novel Zadie Smith, who I think is a great novelist, her first book, or no, her second book, I think, was on beauty, and it had a teenage boy in it. But to your point, usually the teenage boys they're either written off or they're very, very secondary characters. I know a lot.
There's like we need to talk about Kevin or something, but
Yes,
but it's it's about a boy who's a monster or whatever, or it's something like that. But in this book, they're just trying to navigate, life basically. I don't know.
Yeah, no, that's it. I think in Beautiful Boy, that book that got made into that movie, I mean, you're dealing with huge issue of addiction. Yeah, I think I wanted to really just show this sort of really like the inner life, and I'll use the word vulnerability of these teenage boys. Yeah.
Yeah, speaking of that, the vulnerability. I wanted to ask you about Sam's friend's I can't remember his name, but Sam's friend's accident in the book.
Yes.
Liam. Liam. He watches Liam fall from a bridge and die, and it's 2 years later. And Sam is kind of dealing with the aftermath of that, but it's also I guess kind of forced him to break through this, I don't know, facade of, generational facade of like stoic Mainer masculinity fishermen to become vulnerable. So I wanted to ask you about the importance of the accident to Sam, the importance of that, in the book overall in your mind, and what you were trying to accomplish with that, I guess.
Right. I think that's a great place to go. That's the key conflict for Sam. And for any of you out there that are writers or doing any writing projects, I mean, I teach a lot. I teach in the grad program here in Portland, and I'm always talking about how novels run on tension and they run on conflict. So Sam's loss of his best friend is a huge kind of catalyst, I would say, for a lot of conflict that Sam has. He can't access his emotions about it, and they get more and more sort of bottled up. Sadly, this phenomenon of people falling off of bridges, it's not that uncommon. We have a lot of bridges in the state, and turns out it's a thing, it's a problem. And I remember when I was growing up in a town not so unlike Sewell, just to get back to that issue of autobiography, this happened. Someone fell tragically. And so when I landed on that, and as novelists, we're always looking for plot devices, plot structure that will allow us to explore our characters' emotions. So I created this big conflict for Sam, and then it became the central conflict kind of for the family, because as we all know, or to my experience, when someone's suffering in a family unit, everybody's suffering to lesser degrees or greater degrees. So they all had to kind of try to help Sam, but it was very difficult. And I wondered if, they might lose him for a while to drugs or wanderlust or anger. I didn't know. And I won't say, I'm not going to give away the ending. But he struggles, and it starts with that accident. So you're really great to go there and point it out.
Thanks. So to shift gears again.
Okay.
You mentioned Sewell there, and I wanted to ask if Sewell was based on a real place that you knew, but I want to talk about the setting of the cabin that they live in, Jill describes it as the most beautiful place in the world, and it's central to Kit's life and central to their relationship in a lot of ways. But it's also like an extremely hard place to live. It's a tiny house. It's on an island. It's basically like, it's a great lovely, very evocative and pretty amazing setting, but it's like on a rocky island in Maine that you can't get to in a storm. It's lacking basic necessities. Like there's a moment where Charlie wants to bring his girlfriend there, but can't because it's impassable, basically, or something.
Right.
So I was wondering if the house, to me it seemed like it must be based on a real place. But maybe it's just like a house you've seen on a road, that you drive by a lot or something. But I was just curious, because to me it seemed like this house that I see a lot when I'm on this ferry, and it's like out on this point of land, and you can't. It's an amazing, like from the outside, it's an amazing house, and just because of the setting, and you wonder. I just wondered if it was a place like that you saw a lot.
Yeah, the short answer, yes.
Okay, perfect.
Yep. And then when you, as a writer, you see these places, and then you go about imagining everything about them, right?
You gotta wonder what's going on inside that house. So,
Exactly.
well, good. So to move on, I guess, do you want to talk a little bit about Jill and Kit and their relationship in the book, and things like that? Is that somewhere you want to go? We got.
Well, yeah. I will say that I think anytime someone is going to have to reinvent themselves inside a long marriage, it's going to cause trouble. It's just going to cause change. Like, does change mean suffering? There's that question again. So, I think I have seen many fishermen in Maine have this full and complete identity crisis. I remember actually starting to gather notes for this novel, or it was like I was collecting things. And I remember I read a newspaper article about a program that the state was offering here in Maine, where you could go back to community college to learn computer programming as a fisherman, to reinvent yourself. And I thought, but many of the fishermen were struggling with that, and they didn't want to do that. And I thought, that's just, imagine what that's like for the whole family. So that was one of my ideas when I started to think about Kit, would he resist change? And yes, he does. And I think all I'll say is it definitely has ripple effects in the marriage.
Yeah. Okay. That's fair enough. Yeah, I think to me, I wondered if you struggled with, or if you thought about, like, because Kit is kind of, in particular, Kit is kind of almost acting as a stand-in or a metaphor for a whole, like, crumbling way of life or something. And I thought it must be hard to, like a character who has that much, I don't know, weight on his shoulders, or that much behind him, as who's about that much, to make him, human and relatable also. So I guess the question is just, how do you do that as a writer?
You keep it really small. So there's a great writer, I think it's actually a Richard Price, who writes a lot of crime novels. He embeds with police departments for years and such. He had this line: when you want to go big, write small.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't write about the war, you write about the bloody sock on the road, right? So for me to go big and try to write about the Maine fishing industry, I had to go really small and write about a man on a boat off of Georges Bank, which is off of Canada, and the engine explodes, and he gets helicoptered to Nova Scotia, and thus begins the problem of this family because he's so far away. And I just hoped, to your point, that it would start to be a story about a lot of fishermen, if I got it right, if I got the details right about Kit. That's all you can do, right? I mean, that's that idea of the personal becomes universal in story, if we're lucky.
Yeah. So I wanted to ask you about, since we seem to be kind of skirting around the issue a lot, but I wanted to ask you about how working in an MFA program, teaching writing, how that, informs your, I don't know, work as a writer, I guess.
Right. Well, I have a lot of great colleagues, and we talk story all the time, and this idea of craft, right? How to write story. So I learn a lot. It's also just such a fascinating little subculture, right? It's like any subculture, but when you're in it, like everybody's like a word kind of obsessed person. We all talk story all the time, and it's really it makes you feel like you're not alone as a writer, because writing is a really solitary thing. So it's really great to come together and have that community. And I work with a lot of writing students. Actually, I have a lot of private writing students who come to me for editing, because it's impossible. It's very hard to write books alone. It's just very hard. I often encourage my students to form writing groups, which they do. That's what sustains them. It's really difficult to write, as I say, like in a vacuum where you're alone. Yeah.
Do you personally, like in writing this book, did you use a lot of did you get a lot of feedback from peers and things like that, or I mean, do you know what I mean? Did you have people read it as you were writing it? Yeah.
I've had the same writing group for 15 years at least. It's only 5 of us, but we have a great system where we just share work regularly. So they always read everything and give me feedback. And then I have other people that I also share the work with once it's done.
Yeah, like
and
agents and what.
Well, and then I do have the same agent and the same editor for the last 5 books. All my books, I've had the same editor and agent, so that's also really wonderful. But that's way ahead down the line. The key is to have people that you can share your work with early. And often we writers have a joke. It should not be your spouse or your partner or your girlfriend or boyfriend usually.
Probably not.
Yeah, unless they're really into writing.
You read about relationships like that, where or you see it in acknowledgments pages, thanks to my wife, my first reader, and yada yada yada. Which maybe it's I don't know. Maybe they're not lying. Maybe they're long and happy marriages. I don't know. So sorry, I'm looking over what I've got written down here, so I apologize for the pause. But
no, you've asked really good questions. We've covered some good ground.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think I always want to try and discuss the themes of the book in these and give readers a taste. So I feel like there are a lot of little, we may have talked about this a little bit already, but I feel like there are a lot of little micro genres in fiction based on place. For example, a lot of the writers I talked to in this series are from Ohio, or I lived in Montana for a while. There's like a very strong genre of all sorts of Montana books, but there's also like the literary Montana books. So I wonder if you think there's a genre of the Maine novel, and I wonder if where you think your or where you think this book fits in that genre, and are there things you're pushing up against? Do you want to explode it all together? What or I mean, other great Maine books.
That's a great question. I've never been asked that before. Yeah, so there's definitely a genre of Maine, which is writing, which is like this very masculine, very man and nature sort of theme, right? And it probably starts with like we have this poet here, Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, and and he wrote all these like long poems about being in nature in Maine, and we have a long tradition also of art in Maine, painting in Maine. It's all about this very rocky coastline and all this sort of drama, and man versus sea and such. But then we get into this interior life of real Mainers, and then we get into the work of like Elizabeth Strout, and she's the one who won the Pulitzer Prize for Olive Kittredge. I highly recommend. It's a collection of interlinked stories, and then she had Olive Again. I think there's been 3 books along that storyline, and this is a more understated Maine, a lot more nuance. It's still a Maine where less is more, and where people speak in more clipped, sort of idiosyncratic ways, like they kind of do in Landslide too, because that just is the way we speak here. But yeah, what am I pushing up against with the genre? I think it's really hard to write Maine and Maine, not the natural world, and not be cliche. So I was working really hard to try to describe the ocean in new ways, describe the land. Yeah, I was really up against that. And also wanted to, again, as I said, subvert some ideas we had about like the Maine fishermen not being vulnerable. So yeah, it's an ongoing answer. It's an ongoing answer.
No, I know, but that's a good answer though, and
Thanks.
So I want to finish asking one question about the boys in the book. You get the sense that they're kind of the last, you get the sense that there's this long tradition, there's generations of fishermen, there's generations of this kind of masculine Maine ideal, and you've got the 2 boys, and they're the end product of this long tradition. But their life growing up is not, there's the idea that they might leave or that they want to leave, but there's also the idea that the traditions just aren't going to be available to them. I mean, this is just not, basically, I think the one boy in the book goes and works on the boat a little bit, and well, it's Sam. He he's more centered when he's, I don't know, working with the boats or something. But you get the sense that it's, I mean, do you think it's the end of the line for that kind of tradition in Maine? I guess that's do you know what I mean? I mean, do you think these boys, flash forward to the sequel 20 years later, where are they, or where are the kids of this generation in Maine?
Whoa, I think that might be the question of the novel, or the question after the novel. It's the Mainers that I know, the adults are doing a lot now to try to keep those boys in Maine. They want those boys to stay in Maine. They are coming up with some new, really interesting ways to buy permits, fishing permits, which are the keys to the car, right? Like you could have a boat, but you still need a fishing permit. which costs a lot of money and has a certain amount of quota on it in the state. There's a lot of new innovative ways to help young men and women, mostly men still, but women, buy a boat, buy a permit. So there are nonprofits here that their entire work is to try to save commercial fishing in Maine. And, I actually hope my book helps that. I'm going to be doing some events with some of those nonprofits. If I had to guess right now, I'd say Sam's fishing. Charlie's not. Charlie's like gone out of state. He's doing something. He's doing something with science. He wants to be some kind of research scientist. But Sam's fishing. But maybe he's doing something that we don't know, that we can't expect yet with fishing. Like, is it aquaculture? Is it oysters or scallops or who?
Yeah.
Or you know what I'm saying? It's going to be something. It's not going to look like it used to. But I think maybe he still has a boat. I hope he does.
Yeah. Okay. I hope so too. So I'm just going to ask a couple more questions that I had that pretty much ask everyone. So that's okay. the end of the boring into the book, but everyone go and buy it. And I really did enjoy reading it. So, all right. So, what's the last great book you read and why would you recommend it?
Okay. Well, I read a book this summer that I really liked called, and it comes back to your question about books about teenage boys. It was called Dear Edward, and it was by Anna Napolitano, and it was a teenage boy who basically is left without he loses his whole family. This on page 2. So I'm not giving anything away. And it delves into his mind and his life. And it's really a very good book. So that was a great book.
Okay, great. And what's next for you? What are you working on next?
Well, interestingly, for our conversation, I'm finishing a long feature story for a big magazine here in Maine called Down East Magazine. Which has a national distribution, and it's all about commercial fishing in Maine. So I'm finishing a non-fictional version of Landslide in a way, where I'm talking to a lot of fishermen. So I'm doing that, and then looking ahead further.
So the documentary filmmaking in the book really is very meta then.
It is.
Yeah, that's cool. I'll look forward to reading that because it's the book certainly made me think a lot about fishing in Maine.
Great.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Oh no, not at all. Yeah, that's that time delay. No, and then I have nothing more to add really. I mean, I have the very beginnings of a novel idea in my head it's actually women, New England, coming of age, but I've got nothing more to say about it. So
yeah. All right. Well, yeah, a couple people commented as we were going that the end of a generation theme, or the theme of generational change is so prevalent in Rust Belt fiction, and so prevalent in what we think about here in the Rust Belt, that it's interesting to hear about it from a different perspective. So,
well, I'm glad. I was thinking about that. I was hoping that, I think so many of these themes just echo, right? You can whatever industry, and then they echo. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Travis. These have been really great, thought-provoking questions for me. So
thank you. I really appreciate that. Yeah, I appreciate you coming.
My great pleasure. It's been really fun.
All right. Well, have a great night, and everyone have a good night.